Jennifer Turney. Whether it's short stories, flash fiction, novel-length pieces, or the occasional screenplay, Jennifer rarely shies away from trying new things. The challenge of trying to tell so much while using so few words is why she loves short stories above all else. Jennifer is a returning reader to the Tall Pine Tales. She is also a 6-time writer at the Muskoka Novel Marathon, where in 2018 and again in 2019, she was successful in winning the award for Best Manuscript. She has also had several short stories published with Blank Spaces magazine. She is presently compiling a short story collection entitled Shoes, Socks, and Other Body Parts, while balancing a growing career and a happy family life in Huntsville with her husband Jim and their 3 children Carson, Haley, and Olivia, and their black cat Lilo. Jennifer is reading a story called Step, Swing, Slide, Stomp that was inspired partly by those nearest and dearest to her, but also from her brief career as a tree marker in Fort Frances, and displays a strong but unique family dynamic. Jennifer Turney.
It was another Friday in June. For once, Maddie's mother hadn't had to rush him to finish his lunch so they could walk into town. His shoes were already tied, at least as tight as a 5-year-old's can be when in a hurry. "Hurry up, Mom, we're going to miss some," he urged, trying to stuff his arm into an uncooperative jacket sleeve. "Oh, shush now, we're not going to miss anything," Maddie's mother shrugged on her own coat, sighing with defeat as it refused to zip over her expanding belly, and she shuffled her feet into a pair of worn sneakers. She hoped they matched, but she hadn't been able to see her feet in 2 weeks. Maddie skidded to a halt at the end of their short gravel driveway. He waited for her to catch up and took her hand before stepping onto the sidewalk. The warm scent of pine was on the breeze, and she inhaled, savoring it. The walk into town wasn't far, which meant the walk home with groceries wouldn't be overdoing it. It was one of the nice parts of living in Fort Frances. Nothing was too far. Along the sidewalk on neighboring lawns, the fragile noses of crocuses were poking through the earth. They headed up the street towards the Safeway, his mother taking slower steps to accommodate his distraction with balancing on the curb. She let his hand go and stepped in line behind him, mimicking his outstretched arms that kept the force of gravity at bay. "When will they get here?" "Soon. It takes a while." "How come?" "Because they live way out in the bush. The roads are really bumpy, so they have to drive slow." Satisfied for the moment, Maddie continued his tightrope walk. Bumpy was an understatement. The bush roads were brutal, especially riding in old retired school buses. When your stop came, you were always eager to get off. Having so many damp and dirty workers trapped inside together with their special blend of earthy musk mixed with DEET and a dash of cold camp coffee, well, it was enough to make your eyes water. "I've been practicing, you know," Maddie announced as he stopped at the corner. "Watch me," he said, and then proceeded with the routine his mother had shown him from her planting days. "Step, swing, slide, stomp." He called out his clumsy actions as he performed them with his invisible planting shovel. His mother smiled as he continued on. She remembered when she'd learned it. Step, swing, slide, stomp. Step, swing, slide, stomp. She remembered struggling to keep the steps even over uneven terrain, the debris always seeming to be right where her foot should go. "Step, swing, slide, stomp," Maddie continued on. "How many trees is that now, Mum?" "Maybe 25? She scrunched her face to count. "Is that a lot of money yet?" he asked. When she'd been a planter, she'd made a dime a tree. To a 5-year-old, that would seem like a lot of money. "It's a good start," she said. "How many trees did you plant ever?" he forged on. "Oh, a few more than that, Maddie." "But how many for real?" "Oh, probably..." She hesitated for dramatic effect. He wasn't impressed. "Over 10,000, she said. Maddie wasn't sure he'd learned that number yet. As they approached the laundromat, Maddie hopped up on the wooden bench outside and pressed his hands to the window to peer in. The machines were still. There weren't piles of bags near the door. They hadn't arrived yet. "What you see?" his mother asked, sliding her coat off. She looked at her son and saw how the sunlight caught in his curls, making them appear auburn and fiery. "They aren't here yet," he answered, his disappointment heavy. "They will be," she reassured him. With a bit of coaxing and after a quick stop into the Red Apple bargain shop, the pair finished at the grocer's and started back towards the laundry. His mother was busy looking over a receipt as Maddie exploded. "They're here!" Looking up, she saw what he saw. A road-weary, dust-caked school bus parked at the curb. People were piling off, dragging duffel bags behind them that looked as threadbare and stained as the clothes they were holding. The people looked to be faring about the same. As Maddie watched with fascination, his mother remembered her trips into town. First was the laundry, then they'd rent rooms so everyone could shower. She remembered scrubbing her body and washing her hair, and after 3 lathers, almost feeling like she'd gotten the deed out of her pores. Then it was on to the Rainy Lake restaurant to savor cold pints of beer and the mammoth-sized man burgers they were famous for. The driver was the last to climb off, and Maddie broke into a sprint. "Daddy!" he yelled, leaping into his father's arms. "Hey, kiddo," he said, embracing him. When her 2 boys turned to look at her, Maddie had a giant smudge across his face. She placed the groceries down on the sidewalk. Her husband turned to her and placed a light hand against her belly before wrapping her in his arms. "And how are my girls doing?" "Oh, still hanging in there," she said. "How was your week?" He smiled at her in the same way he had almost 15 years earlier. "Got a bit sweeter just now," he said. He handed her a dirty Tupperware container he'd filled with wild strawberries. "That patch of ours is still there." She smiled and felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a weight she hadn't known she'd been carrying, a weight that would probably return when the busload left again tomorrow. Maddie had climbed onto the bus and was examining a deer antler that had been resting on the dash. "Is this mine?" he asked, holding it to his forehead. "Sure is, kiddo. Found it in the bush this week." Maddie's father broke away from the family to speak to his crew before leaving them for the night. He went over the rules and cautioned that if they were late, he'd leave without them. They all knew, of course, that he'd never left anyone behind in 10 years. She looked over the rowdy group, one smoothing out a rolling paper as another dropped a pinch of tobacco onto it, others involuntarily scratching themselves either from insect bites or just the dry, flaking filth they were carrying. They didn't look much different than the crew she'd been a part of, and shuddered at the idea that she'd ever been in public with the same severe stains and tears in her clothes. She noticed, though, that they were all laughing and smiling. Theirs was a life that fit into an 8x8 tent, with damp work boots that never seemed to dry out completely. It was where you hoped you never ran into a bear that was trying to share your lunch, as they tended to be greedy dining companions with poor manners. It was a job where you found yourself alone for most of the day, and you recharged your social skills around campfires at night with the rest of them. And the next morning, you geared up and did it all over again. It took a special breed of crazy to be able to endure what they were and to do the job that they did. She completely understood how they could still be smiling. They loved it just like she had. "I can do the work now, Daddy. Watch," Maddie interrupted, proceeding to step, swing, slide, and stomp his paces. "It's not half bad," his father said, ruffling his hair and causing Maddie to squirm out of reach. "So can I go back with you this time?" The 2 parents looked at each other, and soon Maddie was distracted enough that he let the idea drop for another week. The trio ate dinner together, and when her boys fell asleep on the couch watching television, she couldn't help but smile. Theirs was a dynamic that not many had. He was able to continue doing a job he loved to support his family, and she held down the fort to support him. The new addition would keep her even busier, but it all just seemed like her next great adventure.